All right. Good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining. This class is in merit of all the Jewish people, especially in the land of Israel, especially those that need rescuing, need health, wealth, everything that they need, success. Okay. First of all, we're going to be discussing the book of Ruth, which is connected to the holiday of Shavuos. Many communities, they actually read this on Shavuos. And so we're going to be discussing the beginning of the book of Ruth. The book of Ruth starts off with a man whose name was Elimelech. He had a wife whose name was Naomi, and Naomi's husband Elimelech passed away, and her children married two women. One was named Orpah, one was named Ruth. And essentially they lived in the land of Moab. Okay? They did not live in the land of Israel, which is Moab is right outside the land of Israel. And at some point, both Machlon and Kilion, who were the children of Naomi, passed away. And at some point, Naomi said, why don't you go back to Moab? And sure enough, both women, Orpah and Ruth, said, no, let's stay here. And eventually he said, what are you doing? When are you going to come with me? When are you going to come with me to the land of Israel? Why don't you stay here? There's no one to get married in the land of Israel. Stay in Moab. You'll get married. These were both women who were princes in the land of Moab. At any rate, at some point, Orpah leaves, and Ruth says, I'm not going. And then she says the famous words. I'll read in the Hebrew, and I'll translate into the English. Ruth replies, she says, do not force me to go back. Wherever you go, I will go. Wherever you lodge, I will lodge. Amech Ami, your nation is my nation. And your God is my God. Wherever you die, I will die. Wherever you are buried, I will be buried. So, only death will separate us. Okay. Naomi sees Ruth is determined to return to the land of Israel with her, and they go and back. And we all know the end of the story is Ruth ends up being the great-great-grandmother of King David, and eventually of the Mashiach. And she becomes one of the greatest converts in the history of the Jewish people. And it all starts with these words, where you will go, I will go. And in fact, the Talmud learns many laws about how to deal and how to go about a conversion. We learn specifically from the book of Ruth. So let's see Rashi comments right away on this. And he says as follows. Ki el asher telchi elech. Where you will go, I will go. Rashi explains, from this, our sages learn that when someone comes to convert, they are told about some of the prohibitions and consequences for breaking the commandments, so that if they choose to go back out, they can. From Ruth's words, you can understand what Naomi had said to her. So when it says, what's the first thing she said? She said, listen, Ruth, you're coming back with me. Do you know there's a Jewish law, that it's forbidden for us to go beyond the boundary on Shabbos? That according to Jewish law, a person is not allowed to leave city limits 2,000 amos, 2,000 cubits. It's about 3,600 feet. Not very big distance outside civilized areas. And so obviously that would affect their traveling. So she says, where you go, I will go. Okay, that's the first thing. The second thing is, she says, it is forbidden for a woman to be secluded with a man who is not her husband. So Ruth responds to Naomi, where you lodge, I will lodge. Right? So again, according to Jewish law, it's forbidden for a woman to be secluded alone with another man who's not her husband. So therefore she says, yeah, I will stay where you're going to go. And the last thing is, I shouldn't say the last thing, the third thing is, she says, our people, the Jewish people, we are different than all other people. Why? We have 613 commandments. To Ruth responds, your people are my people. And the last thing is, she says it is forbidden for us to worship other gods, and Ruth responds, your God is my God. Okay, that is the Rashi's explanation of this. We learn from here what to convey to a convert who wishes to convert to Judaism, what we have to convey, which laws and which mitzvahs, and how we go about talking about Judaism to a potential convert. So the question is, though, we all know, we discussed this a few times in our classes, Rashi's job is to explain the simple meaning of the verse. And the question is, seemingly, this is a very straightforward verse, and there's no need for any commentary. She says, I want you to go back to Moab. I'm going back to the land of Israel. She says, you go, where you go, I will go. Well, you lodge, I will lodge. Your people is my people. Your God is my God. Excuse me. So seemingly that's not very complex. It's pretty straightforward. Why does Rashi have to insert that this is actually a conversation between Naomi and between Ruth about what is the Jewish laws and the prohibitions? So that's the first issue, right? What's the complexity that Rashi is addressing in the simple meaning of the verse? Simple meaning. Number two, a bigger question is, why would, if you're going to have a conversation with someone about Judaism, seemingly the order of this conversation is very backwards. The first question is, the Rashi says, the first thing she tells her is, you're not allowed to go out of the boundaries on Shabbos. Okay, I mean, that it's a very important Jewish law. It's not mentioned. It's not the first thing that comes to mind when you think about Judaism. And we're talking. Let's think about it. Like, if you want to say top 10 things that are important in Judaism, probably the 10 Commandments that we're going to read, God willing, on Monday, on the holiday Shavuos. We're going to be celebrating for the 337th time the giving of the Torah. 10 Commandments. God mentions keeping Shabbos, doesn't mention the law of the Tchum, of the going out of the boundary of the city on Shabbos. So if you're going to mention Shabbos, why would you mention that? There's many, many other things on Shabbos. You can mention, listen, on Shabbos you make Kiddush, right? That's in the 10 Commandments. Zachar is Yom HaShabbos Kasher. Remember the Sabbath. That refers to Kiddush. Maybe mention other prohibitions. The Torah says not to light a fire on Shabbos. Seems very practical. So why this specific law? The next one is, the next thing is that the Torah the next thing it says that where you lodge, I will lodge, and Rashi explains this referring to the prohibition of secluding oneself alone that a woman cannot seclude herself with a man who she's not married to. Now, what would be the thing that would tell me that this is not the simple meaning? It sounds like you're going on a trip, and she says, "Will you lodge? I will lodge." I mean, that's pretty straightforward. It's like we're going to room together, right? We're going to save money on hotels. We're going to stay in the same place. Seems pretty straightforward. What compelled Rashi to say that? And then we have the third thing is Ruth responds, my people are your people. Again, the same thing. Rashi says this means that Ruth wanted to tell her, that Naomi wanted to tell her that we have 650 commandments. Why don't you say, it sounds pretty straightforward. You asked me to come to the land of Israel. I'm saying I'm pledging allegiance to your people. Not why specifically it has this to do about the 630 commandments. And the last thing is, she says it's forbidden to worship other gods. And Ruth says, your God is my God. Seemingly again, your God is my God. Why would that be the thing that you mentioned last? Seemingly, if you're going to talk again, even let's look at the 10 Commandments for an example. The first thing God says is, I am the Lord your God. Do not worship any other gods. So why would that be the last thing you say? If you're going to want somebody to be initiated into the Jewish faith, first thing is, by the way, there's one God. That's the number one thing about Judaism. But instead, this is the last thing she mentions. We talked about the Tchum, about the boundary on Shabbos, the prohibition of secluding. We even tell her the 630 commandments. And by the way, one of the commandments is that you have to worship one God. She already accepted the 630 commandments. Why are you mentioning we don't worship other gods? Not only that, let's even take it a step further. we all know that there are 7 Noahide laws that were given to all people, and the first one is not to worship, not to only worship one God, not to worship idols. So seemingly, this is superfluous. If she's a righteous woman, and even if she wouldn't be Jewish, she has to follow this law of not worshiping idols. So, what in the world is going on here? So, we could explain as follows. This pasuk is talking about this pasuk, these psukim, I should say, these verses are coming after a whole conversation, right? We talked about that she tells them go back, don't go back, and again, Rashi explains that that she was again Ruth wanted to convert, and Naomi saying just go back, and again Orpah does go back, says she goes back to her people and her gods, and she says I have no more children for you to marry, etc. So seemingly, if she said, I guess the last question we could even say is, when she says, if she already agreed to convert, right? She says, I'm coming with you. Why does she have to say your people or my people, etc.? So because of this, Rashi has to explain that this conversation that we had, that I will be your people and you'll be your people will be my people, obviously it has to be something deeper. It can't just be a conversation of pledging allegiance, because we already had that conversation. So Rashi says that there must be something more going than meets the eye. And that's why Rashi felt the need to explain this as teaching that Naomi was teaching Ruth about the basics of Judaism. And this is very important, and we'll now understand why Naomi picked these specific things to talk about. So let's start with number 1 is the boundary. Later on in the book of Ruth, we're going to talk about how Naomi returns from the fields of Moab to Bethlehem at the beginning of the barley harvest. And Rashi says this is the time of the harvest, meaning it's after Pesach, and therefore they were either traveling on Pesach or after Pesach. So therefore, it was important that they had to know how far they could travel on a holiday or Shabbos. In other words, this was a very practical thing. In other words, Naomi's saying to her, okay, you want to be Jewish? Let me tell you what that practically means. Right now, we're not traveling on Shabbos. We're not walking past the city limits, past 2,000 cubits past the city limits. That is very, very practical. And Ruth says, I accept that. The next thing is, she says, it is forbidden to be secluded with a woman is not allowed to be secluded with a man who's not her husband. So again, since this, again, a very practical situation, because they're going to be traveling, they're going to be staying in other people's homes or hotels, whatever it may be. Therefore, it's very important that they had to know, listen, this is how we're going to behave on our way. And lastly, the next thing that's necessary as the Jewish people come into the land of Israel, Naomi has to explain to Ruth that there are 630 commandments that I'm going to be following, and you have to follow along with me. And this is the uniqueness of the Jewish people. In other words, that it's not just the fact that you're coming to join the people and now you're going to be a citizen, you're going to get a card in the mail that says you're a citizen of the land of Israel. No, you're going to be a Jew, and a Jew is somebody who keeps the 630 commandments. This is not just a joining another nation. This is a unique nation that has 630 commandments. And now we could also understand the last thing that Naomi says. So now that she understood that there are 630 commandments, she had to explain something. Because like we said before, the non-Jews are also commanded not to worship idols. However, there is a difference brought down in many codifiers of Jewish law, is that non-Jews are not allowed to while they're not allowed to worship idols, they are allowed to do what is called shituf, association, which means they're allowed to believe that God, that there's no prohibition for a non-Jew to believe that God has partners, so to speak, in creation. This is not a class on theology, so I'm not going to get too down the rabbit hole, but essentially means that they're allowed to believe that God gave the ability to certain things and they're a little bit more autonomous. In Judaism, a Jew is required to believe that there's only God and only God runs the world alone. He doesn't need anybody else to help him. Non-Jews, there is no prohibition, while they are discouraged from that as well, but there is no prohibition, according to the Torah, for non-Jews to believe in association, and that there's God, and then he has people who help him, that have some sort of authority. So essentially, there's two, again, so that Naomi is telling Ruth that when you come to the land of Israel, that you are not just accepting she's not telling her that she has to accept the fact that there's only one God, because that she already has to believe in even as a non-Jew. But she's telling him that even as a Jew, not only you have to believe in one God, you have to believe that it's God and God alone, the oneness of God. That is a Jewish specific faith, a specific part of the Jewish faith that does not necessarily apply to non-Jews. So therefore, now Ruth, excuse me, Ruth had to accept that as well. Now, we see how this actually is a very applicable thing that, again, we actually learned in the Torah, and the Talmud actually learns from this story many laws pertaining to conversion, how to go about the conversion process. So many times people will think that actually, that conversion is that conversion should be a theology class. If somebody comes, they say they want to convert to Judaism, and they say, okay, so tell me, what are these 613 commandments? What does theology say about God? What does Judaism say about theology, I should say? What is a theological approach in Judaism? But the truth is, we see that those things are on the bottom of the list. The first thing when a person comes to convert is we talk about the practical mitzvahs. We talk about the practical. We tell them, if you're going to be Jewish, you're going to have to do this. You're going to have to do that. These things are coming up. There's a holiday coming up. There's a situation coming up you're going to have to deal with. You're not going to be able to do anymore. You have to do it differently. That is the things that we talk about to a potential convert. Those are the first things we talk about. And again, even though these things may not be in the Ten Commandments, and there may even be some of these things may even be rabbinic prohibitions. They might not be prohibitions that are explicit in the Torah. Nonetheless, since these things are immediately relevant, these are the things that we start with. And in other words, if a convert comes, and it's Friday, we tell them, listen, if you're going to be Jewish, you have to know what to do on Shabbos. Even if it may not be, so to speak, from the 10 Commandments and the top 10 things that the Jewish people are busy with. And only after we talk about practical commandments, then do we talk about theological discussions and all the 613 commandments. And this is something that we also see, that we see the importance of the Torah, of the specific commandments, that we can't just be Jewish by being theologically correct, right? Say, listen, I believe in God, I believe that God's oneness, but the real challenge of being a Jew is we got to do the mitzvahs. We got to do the practical things that make us Jewish. And we see that many people made this mistake, not just in recent times, but going back even King Solomon. King Solomon, it says in the Torah that a king should not take too many wives. A king shouldn't have too much money. A king shouldn't have too many horses. And it says why? So that he will not stray. And but King Solomon said, listen, I'm very righteous, right? Solomon said he is he was the wisest man in the world. So Solomon said, this is quoted in the Medrash, he says as follows: why did God say he shall not multiply wives? Is it not so? His heart will not turn away. He says, I will multiply my heart. I will multiply and my heart will not turn away. In other words, I'm stronger than that. I could overcome that challenge. And at that moment, the Yud in the letter Yirbe, which means to multiply, came before God and said, "Are you telling me that are you telling me that the Torah is nullified? If one letter of the Torah is nullified, then the whole Torah is nullified." So God says, Solomon will be nullified, but you will not be nullified. Not one letter in the Torah. And what ends up happening is that King Solomon, we all know the story. King Solomon marries a woman, the princess of Egypt, the daughter of the Pharaoh, and he ends up not behaving appropriately in the holy temple. He wakes up late on the day of the after his marriage, and he celebrated his wedding more than he celebrated the holy temple, and that was considered a big mistake that Solomon did. So, and it ended up leading to the destruction of the Jewish people, as is recorded in the Medrash. So, what we see here is what we learn from Ruth, what we learn from Naomi and Ruth's conversation, what we learn from the laws of how a Jew converts to Judaism. The question is not theological. It's not a philosophical. It's not about big ideas. It's about the practical. And that is the truth is for every single Jew, every single one of us. These righteous women taught all the Jewish people that the most important thing of being Jewish is doing the mitzvahs. Yes, we have to understand about theology. We have to understand there's only one God. But the question is, what do you do tomorrow? You can't say, well, listen, once I know, I fully understand the God's oneness in this world, then I'll start to worry about how far I could travel on Shabbos. Then I'll start worrying about keeping kosher. Then I'll start worrying about the laws of being modest. Then I'll start worrying about the 613 commandments. No, it's the other way around. First, you have to know, what am I going to do tomorrow? And what am I going to do today as a Jew? And part of that journey is learning, studying, becoming familiar, and knowing how not just to behave as a Jew, but to think as a Jew. So I want to, on that note, to the coming up on Sunday night is the holiday Shavuos, where we re-accept the Torah. And we're going to be on Monday afternoon, 6:30 p.m. We're going to be having a Torah reading. We're going to be reading the 10 Commandments for the 3,337th time. And you're all invited. If you're in the area, please come join us. If you are not in the area, find a local 10 Commandments reading near you. I'm sure you could find one on the holiday Shavuos. And through these practical mitzvahs, we will, God willing, become better and more proud and more practical Jews. Have a good Shabbos. Have a wonderful Yontif. And we will see you next time.